Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty fascinating today. The world of irrationality and how it all plays out in our work
Oh,
lives.
yeah. It definitely shows up at work.
Big time. And our guide for this deep dive is Dan Ariely's book, The Upside of Irrationality. You might be surprised what we uncover about motivation meaning and how our performance can really go haywire when those things are out of sync.
Absolutely. We often just assume that, to be successful, especially in work, you got to be rational.
Mhm.
But Ariely's research really flips that idea on its head.
Yeah, he does. He starts with a story that's, well, kind of shocking, literally. He talks about these experiments with rats going through a maze and getting zapped with electricity.
Ouch.
Right. And here's the crazy part. The stronger the shocks were, think of that as like a bigger bonus to avoid them, the worse those rats did at learning the maze.
Really?
Yeah, it's like they got so overwhelmed and stressed that their performance just totally tanked.
That's interesting because it makes you wonder, is there like a sweet spot when it comes to pressure and how well we do? Like, you need some pressure to get motivated, but too much, and it can actually like block you from learning or solving problems.
Totally. And it wasn't just rats either. Ariely saw the same pattern with people too, this time using money as that motivator.
I can see that.
So he went to rural India where even small bonuses are a big deal. And what do you find? The people who could earn the biggest bonuses, like 5 months' salary, actually did the worst on the tasks that needed creativity and problem solving.
Wow. So those huge bonuses backfired.
Totally backfired.
Huh. It's kind of like when you have a huge presentation or really important exam coming up and your mind goes blank.
Yeah, or you just can't think straight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ariely's research is saying that it's not just a feeling. It's like a real physical response to stress.
Mhm.
When we're under pressure, our bodies pump out cortisol, and that can actually mess with how our prefrontal cortex works.
Yeah.
The part of our brain that handles planning, decision-making, all that good stuff.
So it's not just that we're choking under pressure, it's that our brains are literally working against us.
Exactly. And what's even more interesting is that this isn't just for tasks that need a lot of brain power. Ariely found that even for straightforward things like playing darts, where more effort should mean better results, those huge bonuses made people do worse.
That's so counterintuitive. You'd think the higher the stakes, the harder people would try.
You would think, right? But our brains don't always work that way. The pressure of that potential reward can mess with our focus and coordination,
Hmm.
and that leads to, less accuracy, worse performance.
And speaking of counterintuitive, Ariely tells this story about sharing these findings with a group of bankers, the folks known for those massive bonuses. He said they were almost offended, like the idea that their bonuses could be hurting their work was just unthinkable.
Ah,
It just goes to show how much we cling to our intuitions even when the data says otherwise. We want to believe that pressure makes us better, but a lot of times it has the opposite effect.
it really does.
So what does this all mean for the rest of us? The folks who aren't exactly rolling in banker-sized bonuses.
I think the takeaway here is to be more aware of how stress affects how we do things.
Mhm.
If you're feeling overwhelmed, find ways to manage that stress, whether it's exercise, meditation, or just taking breaks.
Taking breaks is so important.
It really is.
It's about finding that sweet spot between challenge and feeling totally swamped. Enough challenge keeps us engaged, but not so much that we're constantly stressed and underperforming.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about motivation more broadly. Money's a motivator for sure, but it's not the only one, and it's not always the best one either.
Yeah, haven't we all had that feeling of working on something that just feels pointless, even if it pays well? It's like, what's the point of all this effort if it doesn't really matter?
Totally. That feeling or lack of feeling speaks to our human need to find meaning in what we do. It's not just about getting a paycheck. It's about feeling like we're doing something valuable, something that makes a difference.
Absolutely. Ariely brings this to life with a story about a banker named David. This guy, on paper, had it all: successful career, great salary, the whole 9 yards. But he was miserable. Why? Because his projects kept getting deleted. All that hard work just vanishing into thin air.
Oh, that's rough.
Right. And it shows the difference between what Ariely calls small M meaning and big M meaning. Small M meaning is that satisfaction of doing a task well, using your skills, and seeing the results. Big M meaning that's the feeling that you're contributing to something bigger than yourself, something that has a positive impact on the world.
I like that.
Both types of meaning are important for motivation, right?
Absolutely. Think about it. Even small wins can be super motivating if they connect to who we are, our values, our skills. Achieving something, even something small, It reinforces our sense of competence and makes us feel like we can handle things.
It's like, I did that.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
did that, and I did it well.
To illustrate this, Ariely did these really cool experiments with Legos. He found that people paid to build Lego models were way more productive and persistent when they felt like their creations mattered, even if they were only temporary.
That's so interesting.
What's fascinating is they knew their creations were going to be taken apart. But even knowing that simply seeing their work acknowledged, appreciated it, made a huge difference in their motivation and effort. On the flip side, he had another group watch as their Lego creations were immediately destroyed.
Oh, no.
I know, right? He called this the Sisyphean condition, after that mythical guy who had to endlessly roll a boulder uphill only to have it roll back down.
I remember learning about that in school.
It's such a powerful metaphor for that soul-crushing work so many people experience where effort is ignored, contributions are worthless, and there's zero sense of progress or accomplishment.
Yeah, I could see that.
And what's crazy is this demotivating effect wasn't only for those whose work was actively destroyed. In another experiment, he found that people whose work was just ignored were less productive than those whose work was at least acknowledged, even if it wasn't praised.
Wow, so even just acknowledging someone's effort makes a difference.
It really does. Think
Yeah.
about it. Have you ever put your heart and soul into a project only to have your boss or coworkers totally ignore it?
Oh, yeah, I think we all have at some point. It makes you question everything you know, your skills, your worth as an employee.
It's incredibly demoralizing.
And it's not just bad for individuals, it's bad for companies, too. Companies that don't recognize and value their employees' work are basically shooting themselves in the foot. They're creating a culture where nobody cares and nobody's engaged, and that ultimately hurts productivity and innovation.
So what can managers do to create a work environment that's more motivating and meaningful?
It's not about showering people with praise for every little thing. It's about creating a culture of respect and recognition where people feel like what they do is seen, valued, and appreciated.
It can be as simple as taking the time to give feedback, both positive and constructive, to acknowledge people's effort and to celebrate successes, both big and small.
Exactly. It's about making people feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, that their work has meaning and purpose.
So moving on from the heavy stuff, let's talk about something a little lighter. You know that irrational pride we feel for things we create ourselves, even if they're not perfect? Like that feeling when you finally put together that IKEA bookshelf, even if it's a little wobbly.
It's a feeling of, I built that.
Yes, it's called the IKEA effect. And it's not just sentimentality. Research actually shows that we overvalue things we've put effort into creating. We really believe they're better than things we could have bought pre-assembled, even if objectively they're not.
That makes sense.
And it's funny you mention IKEA because I vividly remember putting together this toy chest a while back. It was a real struggle, but it felt so much more special to me than if I had just bought one already made.
I can definitely relate to that.
That feeling of effort and accomplishment is a huge part of the IKEA effect. We invest our time and energy into something, and that investment makes it feel more valuable to us regardless of its actual qualities.
Interesting.
And this isn't new. Ariely points out the same thing was happening back in the 1950s with cake mixes. Housewives back then actually rejected cake mixes that were too easy.
You're kidding.
Nope. They wanted to feel like they were really baking, so companies started making them add an egg or two to the mix just to create that sense of effort and ownership.
It's like they needed to feel like they were really contributing to the process.
Exactly. It's a brilliant marketing strategy if you think about it. By making people put in a little effort, companies tapped into this psychological need for ownership and made their product more appealing and valuable. And we see the same thing today with like semi-homemade cooking shows, where it's all about finding that balance between convenience and personalization.
It's semi-homemade.
Exactly. It's all about giving people just enough control over the creative process to trigger that sense of ownership and pride in the final product.
I can see that.
And the research is amazing. Ariely describes an experiment where people were asked to make origami. They were willing to pay more for their own creations, even if they were objectively worse than those made by experts. Talk about irrationality.
That's wild.
Right. It's not just that we feel more attached to our own stuff. We genuinely believe they're better.
It really is interesting how our minds work.
It is. And this can lead to some funny situations, you know? It's like when we show off pictures of our kids to strangers, we think our kids are the cutest, but we don't really want to see anyone else's vacation photos.
That's so true.
Our own biases can blind us to the objective qualities of things, making us overvalue what's ours and undervalue what belongs to others.
Yeah, we all have those blind spots.
So how can we use this IKEA effect to our advantage?
Well, if we understand this bias, we can use it to motivate ourselves and others. Give people a role in creating something, even something small like customizing a product or contributing to a project. And it can boost their engagement and satisfaction.
It's all about tapping into that desire for ownership and accomplishment.
Exactly. And that brings us to another common workplace experience. You know, that feeling when your awesome ideas just get ignored. Like when you pour your heart and soul into a proposal and it's met with blank stares or worse, outright dismissal.
Ugh, it's the worst. You feel like you're speaking a foreign language.
Ariely calls this the not invented here bias. It's this tendency to think our own ideas are better, partly because of that sense of ownership we were just talking about, and to be less receptive to ideas from other people.
I remember once I was presenting ideas to some bankers, and they were so unresponsive, it was like talking to a brick wall. Right. It's easy to take it personally, but Ariely says this bias is often unconscious. It's not that they're trying to be dismissive, it's just that our brains are wired to favor our own creations, whether they're physical objects or ideas.
Makes sense.
Ariely uses that classic FedEx commercial to illustrate this point. You know, the one where the boss completely ignores the employee's idea until he repeats it word for word and suddenly it's brilliant?
Oh, yeah, I've seen that one.
It perfectly captures how ridiculous the not invented here bias is. Same idea, but the moment it becomes his idea, he's totally on board.
It's like we need to feel like it's our own before we can really appreciate it.
Exactly. But how does this play out in research?
Well, Ariely and his team did a study where they asked people to come up with solutions to real problems. Then they had them evaluate their own ideas alongside those from other people. And what do you know? People consistently rated their own ideas as way more practical and were willing to invest way more in them, even when they were basically the same as the ideas from others.
So basically, we're all a little bit in love with our own ideas.
It seems that way. And it's not just ego either. Remember, we put mental effort into generating ideas, and that creates that sense of ownership, making them feel more valuable to us.
That makes sense.
But this can be a huge problem in the workplace. How do we get past it and be more open to other people's ideas?
Yeah, it's tough.
The first step, like with any bias, is awareness. If we know we tend to overvalue our own ideas, we could be more mindful of it when we're looking at ideas from other people.
It's about taking a step back and really trying to assess the idea on its own, not just through our own ego.
Exactly. And we can create environments that encourage collaboration and open-mindedness. Instead of presenting ideas as like finished proposals, we can present them as starting points for discussion, inviting others to contribute and build on them.
So it's not about my idea versus your idea. It's about our idea, a collaborative effort that benefits from everyone's perspective.
Exactly. By fostering a sense of shared ownership, we can reduce that not invented here bias and create an environment that's more open to innovation.
That's a great point to wrap up this first part of our deep dive.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. We've explored all these surprising ways our irrational behaviors can impact our work lives, from how we respond to pressure to the importance of meaning and ownership for motivation.
And we've only scratched the surface of Ariely's work. There's so much more to uncover about the upside of irrationality.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve even deeper.
I can't wait. Welcome back to our deep dive into Dan Ariely's The Upside of Irrationality. Last time we were talking about that not invented here bias, that tendency to overvalue our own ideas and undervalue the ones from other people.
Yeah, it's something we've probably all felt, that frustration when our amazing ideas seem to just fall flat. But what Ariely says is really interesting is that this bias isn't only in humans.
Right. He makes this fascinating connection to the world of scientific research. You'd think scientists, with all their focus on data and objectivity, they wouldn't have this bias. But even they, with all their evidence and rigorous methods, can get caught up in the appeal of their own ideas.
It's like we're all human after all.
We are.
So true. He uses the example of Thomas Edison. Edison famously dismissed alternating current, AC as dangerous, a waste of time, even though objectively it was a much better technology than his beloved direct current DC.
Yeah, he was really attached to his DC ideas.
It's a classic example of how our emotions, our attachment to our own creations, can cloud our judgment even when all the evidence points us in a different direction.
It really is. And it's not just Edison either. Ariely talks about this study where scientists were presented with research findings that either supported or went against their own theories.
I bet they were much more open to the findings that already matched what they thought.
Spot on. They were way more critical of the studies that challenged their views, even when those studies were actually better quality. It just goes to show that even the most brilliant minds have biases. We all naturally want to defend our own beliefs and perspectives, even when we see evidence that says we're wrong.
So if scientists struggle with this, what hope is there for the rest of us?
Well, the key here, like with any bias, is that awareness is the first step. If we can admit to ourselves that we have this natural tendency to favor our own ideas, we can start to be more conscious of it when we're looking at information, especially when it challenges our deeply held beliefs.
It's about being willing to question what we think, to be open to new perspectives, and to admit that maybe we're not always right.
Exactly. And it's also about building environments where people are encouraged to give constructive criticism, where people feel like they can challenge the way things are without being punished for it.
That's so important. We need to foster a culture where it's okay to be wrong, where learning from our mistakes is seen as more valuable than always being right.
Absolutely. It's about embracing the idea that we can all learn from each other, that having different perspectives and healthy debate can lead to better solutions and a deeper understanding.
It's about growing and getting better together.
Right?
And it's interesting to think about how this bias might show up in other parts of our lives, not just at work.
For sure. Think about our personal relationships, for example. We often tend to overvalue the partners we've put more effort into, even if those relationships maybe aren't the healthiest or most fulfilling for us.
It's like we're applying the IKEA effect to our love lives. We've put so much effort into building this relationship, so it must be valuable, right?
Right. And it can be really hard to let go of something even when it's not good for us because we've invested so much in it.
It's like sunk cost fallacy.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that these biases can affect our choices in everything we do, not just at work. So as we wrap up our exploration of Dan Ariely's The Upside of Irrationality, what are some key takeaways you think our listeners should remember?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that we're not always as rational as we like to think we are. A lot of our decisions are influenced by these unconscious biases and emotional factors, things we're not even aware of.
It's like we're on autopilot sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
And that's not always a bad thing. Like Ariely points out, there can be an upside to irrationality. It's part of what makes us human.
Exactly. It's what lets us be creative, connect with others, feel joy and love. But we need to be aware of those irrational tendencies so we can minimize the negative effects and use their power for good.
So it's not about becoming perfectly rational, because that's probably impossible and maybe not even a good thing. It's about understanding our biases, accepting our flaws, and learning to work with our wonderfully irrational minds.
Perfectly put. It's about recognizing that our irrationality is part of what makes us special, and that by understanding it, we can live more fulfilling, meaningful lives.
That's a great takeaway. We're back for the last part of our deep dive into Dan Ariely's The Upside of Irrationality. This book has really made me rethink how our minds work.
It is fascinating, isn't it? We like to think we're so rational, but Ariely's research shows that a lot of our decisions are actually driven by these unconscious biases and emotions.
Totally. And in the last two parts, we explored some of those biases, like the IKEA effect and the not invented here bias, and how they can show up in our work lives.
Right, those are some big ones.
They really are. But what's interesting is that Ariely doesn't just point out these irrational things. He actually suggests that there's an upside to them.
Yeah, there's two sides to that coin.
I'm curious about that. How can irrationality be a good thing?
Well, think about it this way. Our emotions, our gut feelings, those seemingly irrational impulses, they're all part of what makes us human. They're what allow us to connect with others, to experience joy and love, to be creative and innovative.
So it's not about trying to get rid of irrationality altogether, because that's probably impossible and maybe not even something we'd want.
Exactly. It's about understanding our biases, accepting our imperfections, and learning to work with our irrational minds instead of fighting against them.
It's about recognizing that our irrationality is part of what makes us unique, and that by understanding it, we can make better decisions both in our work lives and in our personal lives too.
That's a great way to put it. I want to leave you with something to think about. Ariely focuses mostly on the workplace, but what he's saying applies to all areas of life.
I was just thinking about that, like the IKEA effect. We see it all the time in relationships.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We tend to overvalue partners we put more time and effort into, even if those relationships aren't actually good for us.
It's like because we put in all that effort, it has to be worth it.
Right. It can be hard to walk away from something even if it's not working because of how much we've invested in it.
So how do we know when our irrationality is helping us and when it's hurting us?
That's the big question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. But the first step is always awareness. The more we understand about our own biases and how they affect our choices, the better we can make decisions that line up with what we value and what we want to achieve.
So it's about being self-aware, being willing to look inward and question our own assumptions, and realizing that we're all constantly growing and learning.
Very well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I encourage you to think about what you've learned and see how you can use it in your own life.
How can you take the power of your irrational mind and use it to reach your goals, build better relationships, and just live a more fulfilling life?
That's what we want you to take away from this.
We hope this deep dive gave you some interesting things to consider and that it's inspired you to see the human mind in all its complexity.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of irrationality.
And until next time, keep exploring and keep asking questions.